Hi, I'm Kimberly Senior. I'm a director and teacher, and I'm excited to spend a little time with you today in this weird world that we're living in. I'm really excited. So many people sent in some really great questions, so we'll see where we go. I'm hoping I can stay super focused and economical in my responses, but time seems to mean nothing anymore. So we'll see how we go. I want to kind of have like a containing idea that stems from a really great question, which is what is your favorite material to work on? And my answer is so far ranging to that because I love to work on material where I feel like there's a question at the heart of that. So that could be How to Gabbler, or it could be a play that hasn't been written yet, but that there is this sense of that there's something I'm trying to figure out that's inside of the play, and then I require others, designers and administrators and actors, for all of us to come together and to kind of wrestle with this question that's at the heart of the play, and we still can't solve it. So then we require an audience to come in and for them to work on solving the question for us, which then extends into the community. And the question, it's like those like when dandelions get that furry stage that they're in, and then they just disperse everywhere, and then the question gets to live in the world. And sometimes that question is like a howl of tragedy, and sometimes it's us trying to understand something about the very interpersonal human psyche, but it can be really far ranging. And so that it's rather than making work where I'm like, oh, I understand this, or I get it, so I want to share my point of view, I'm instead attempting to I require other people's point of view. And I kind of want to use that as a containing thing with this talk today, because obviously our lives are really different, right? But it's rather than in my mind or experience, rather than dystopian future, we're actually in this return. We're in this cocooning, this hibernation, this pause where we get to really understand who we are as humans, as artists, as creators, as makers, as parents, as children, as siblings, as lovers, as friends, right? So that on a personal, specific way, I was in rehearsal for an amazing play called Our Daughters Like Pillars, written by Kirsten Greenidge at the Huntington Theater Company in Boston. And we were 2 days away from Tech when we learned that the show was not going to be happening. Yet the set was built and was on the stage, and everything was waiting for us. And we now know that hopefully we'll be in the Huntington's next season, with performances beginning in May of 2021, which seems viable, right? Right? Fingers crossed. And it's a marvelous new play. And, suddenly there I was in Boston, and I live in New Jersey. My kids were in New Jersey. I had possibly been exposed, so I stayed in Boston, and I had these days where I was like, okay, how do I keep structure? I'm going to read a play every day. There's all these plays in my inbox. I'm going to watch this television show. I'm going to write in my daily journal. I'm going to cook really healthy, beautiful meals. And I realized I was just filling the calendar. And now I'm finding that having to slow down my tempo and having to slow down my metabolism, all of these details come out. We go for these long walks, my kids and I, and watching for signs of spring and seeing the buds and all of that. All of that is still my artistry and is now opening up all of these new questions for me. So back to the idea about what's the question that lays inside the story. What stories are we going to want to hear when we emerge from this cocoon, when we come out of our hibernation? What stories are we going to want to tell? But what are the stories that are going to compel us to come together? I'm much more curious about our behavior as witnesses and as audience members in this moment. There's a lot of listening I think that we need to do first to understand this new world that we're in. So my advice, if you are an artist who's at home, who's struggling, is that you are being an artist in every moment in a 360-degree way. Think about all your senses are being engaged. I would definitely do this kind of details exercise and see what details you're noticing. Are you reading more slowly and more carefully? Are you discovering a word? What does the world look like around you? How is participating on Zoom different in the way that we listen and the way that we engage and what we notice in one another. I'm going to talk about another great question was about sort of working both on solo work and what it's like to work across different mediums, whether it's doing Sakina's Restaurant with Asif Manvi at the Minetta Lane for Audible, or going to the studio and working on it and then editing it, or doing the live theatrical production of Chris Gethard's Career Suicide, and then doing another one which we then filmed for HBO. And so I'm going to say that those translations, those adaptive steps, is also very much about being an artist in this time. Like, I remember my work for Audible, I'd be in the studio with Asif and I kept wanting to like look at him and engage with him, and I eventually ended up working on the play this way so that I was only taking in what it sounded like. And he even had a hard time as a performer because he's so used to how much story we tell with our body and our face and with objects. And for me to say, like, now imagine you're just in someone's ear or in their car, and they're getting to have this private relationship with you, and how does that change the way we tell stories? And so I think that those steps of translation is a really interesting thing for you to think about in this moment, about what does intimacy feel like and look like? What is the one-on-one experience that we're having? How that's different than theater, right? And then it leads to this other great question of how will theater prevail? Like, you know, the positive side to the bunch of jerks that are not like hunkering down and sheltering in place is that the human need to be near each other is so intense and so great and so overwhelming. And that one of the things, like, I love film, I love TV, I love even the audiobook experience, but it doesn't replace and can never replace sitting next to someone who is different than you and laughing at the same joke or sighing at the same moment. And that need to feel both seen by the work that's on the stage, or seen by our neighbor who's having that similar experience to us, but also the desire for increased empathy, I think will bring us all back together. Theater is a place where we get to collectively celebrate, collectively grieve, collectively experience joy and pain and all of these emotions in a place that's in a safe arena. And so we artists who are making theater will be the soldiers that are reenacting these tragedies and joys of our lives for people who are really going to need it in that moment, because that is the thing that we are missing, is that communal experience. There is, my Zoom Seder last night was just not the same, right? It was still special, and other things emerged, and maybe more people had a chance to participate because we sort of went around through our gallery view and everybody got to say something. But there's something amazing about how theater will prevail at this time. And this really leads into the idea of community. I was practicing theater in Chicago for about 20 years. That's where I came up, and I will often say that I like stand on the city's broad shoulders. It's an incredible, incredible place to make work. There's something interesting about Chicago being in the middle of the country, right? In LA, there's theater, but there's also like film and TV, and there's this kind of way that you could make money eventually. And in New York, now of course we have more film and television, but we also have this sort of big commercial machine of Broadway, and there's like a way to make money. In Chicago, we have 150 storefront theaters, and there's like no way to make money. Like even if you're working at the big theaters, like, and are lucky enough to like book 4 shows a year, that's hardly a fortune that you're bringing home. But it's also a very livable city and much more affordable, and there's more space and there's more opportunity to kind of fail. And so it's a really, really unique place that is also driven by a kind of ensemble collective that many of the theaters there espouse. It is also built on a kind of like Midwestern value of just working really hard, and there's a lot of grit in the theater there. There's this kind of DIY mentality that so much of my early theater experiences were about duct tape and tin foil and putting it together in a theater above a Mexican restaurant that only had 50 seats in it, but that you could make theater, that non-equity doesn't mean non-professional there. And so a community really emerges. And what's amazing about that in Chicago is that community feels very intergenerational, where people who have been making theater there for 40 or 50 years are really excited to bring up the next generation and know how much there's like an ecosystem that really thrives on that. Like the bigger theaters need to feed from these smaller theaters, and we kind of all grow and change together. And we're also each other's audiences there in such an amazing way. And so back to that idea of a question, and in particular, I think in these times for me, that question is living in what is best reflecting the American experience at this moment. I have two kids, Noah, who's 13, and Delaney, who's 11, and I often talk about wanting to make work that I would be proud of them seeing on stage, that reflects the ever-changing world that they live in, so that the theater is a place they can come to engage in their world, not to sort of passively see it go by or see an idealized version of it, but how are we getting to kind of solve the problems of our lives or solve the questions of our lives in engaging in the theater. And so a lot of times, right, that work is about identity politics or racial politics or gender politics. And these are all things that we've been sorting in our lives. And so, to another question is that, there a question about, I felt my career had a big turning point. And there have been several, right? Some of them are about like marked successes that you can see on the timeline, where maybe that like dot's a little bigger on that timeline. But some of them are internal revolutions. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different things. One is I did a production called The Life and Times of Tulsa Love Child, a Road Trip. At the time, I was working full-time at Steppenwolf and also a part of a smaller theater company called Roadworks. At Steppenwolf, I was working in the education department. And at Roadworks, I was like reading plays to see what our company could produce. And I found, we were moving offices, and I found in the bottom of a drawer this play, The Life and Times of Tulsa Love Child, a Road Trip by Greg Owens. And I'd never heard of Greg Owens and never heard of this play. And I read it, and this play takes place in 37 scenes and goes across like 3,000 miles. And there's Siamese twins in it, and someone drives a combine, and it's like a virtually unproducible play. And I got really excited about it and fell in love with it. And it's a journey to home and a journey to love and a journey to sort of understand like who we are. And I was obsessed with it. And so Roadworks didn't want to do it, but I convinced I had also started a theater company called Collaboration, and I convinced my theater company to do it. And we had like a shoestring budget, and I also had to convince the playwright to let it happen, because he had gone to grad school and was writing all these like 2 to 4 person unit set plays that weren't getting produced. And then was like, pardon my French, like, fuck it, I'm gonna write the play I want to write. And he wrote this play, and that was his like farewell to theater, and he didn't care that it lived in drawers. So I'm in my cubicle at Steppenwolf, and the play is out on my desk because I'm trying to figure out how to get a hold of Greg Owens. And the publicist walks by, and she's like, do you know Greg Owens? I went to college with him. And I was like, help me get in touch with him. And so this is 2000, 99 or 2000. And so like through a series of like landline phone calls, I get a hold of Greg Owens, and he's since moved to Montana. And he's like, yeah, I don't really care about that play being produced. And I like begged him to let us produce it. And he put all these stipulations on it. And we were this tiny, tiny theater company. We had to like fly him out, and we had to house him, and we had to figure all this out. But I was so in love with this play. So I make this play, and it is opening night. And I meet with did I mention there were 14 actors in the play? So I meet with my 14 actors that are literally performing on like a 12 by 12 foot stage with a combine on it over 3,000 miles. And so I say to them, for the first time in my career, that's why it's a turning point, I said, I don't care what anybody thinks about this play. Obviously we made the play for the audience, and it's not complete until they come here. But the work that we have made and what this story means to us is so vast and so great that like I can hold that, and I don't need the applause. And I hope you all feel the same way. Then of course this play ends up being this like ridiculously big hit, which was just, I think, because it was so quirky and unexpected in this moment. And maybe because it didn't care, right? It didn't have, its insecurity wasn't showing, because it was so just kind of out there for anyone to see. And we ended up remounting it, and it was like top play to see now. And it was my first kind of like big public hit. So it was a turning point both as an inner revolution and also as an external revolution. And after that, I started working at theater companies that weren't my own. Like there were other small theater companies that were suddenly like, who is this person? And maybe we should hire her. And, and for those of you who are directors, it was there's two really difficult things that I feel like I'm still working on understanding sometimes. I shouldn't have said two, there's a lot, right? So one is when someone's hiring you, they're essentially entrusting like whether it's a third or a fifth or a seventh of their budget into your hands. Like that's a lot of trust. So it doesn't matter how great a director you are, how much work you've done. There's something about kind of their conversation with you and that you're trying to build a relationship. So I think that's a really important thing to note about how much trust an institution is putting in your hands and how careful and respectful you have to be of that trust. That's one thing. The other thing is that we get to do our career forever, for a really long time. We're not going to age out of it. I was in an event where Jack O'Brien spoke, and I remember thinking like, wow, like he's still so excited and impulsive and thrilled about making work. And I thought, I'm going to be too, which means I'm only like a third of the way through my career. And that made me really excited and in less of a rush to like achieve things, which I think is also really important. And like we keep changing, and so our work keeps changing. We get to evolve with the work. Like if you are a 22-year-old watching this who's directed one play, like you are no better or worse a director than I am. I've just gone to do it more than you. So I may be faster at it, more economical, more efficient. My diagnostic tool might be better, but like your intuition, your imagination, your ingenuity, your words that begin with I, your invention, all of that, like you have the same as me. And it just keeps changing based on who we are in the world and where we are in the world, which leads me to another question people had is like, what is it? Like as a director, are you ever done? And also what's it been like where I've gotten to make a bunch of plays a bunch of times? Like Disgraced, I got to do 7 productions of over 5 years. And The Niceties, I did five productions over 3 years and over many different cities. And what that is like. And what a gift to be able to make plays over and over and over again, because the world changes around us, right? So the first time I made Disgraced was in a 99-seat theater in Chicago called American Theater Company, which sadly no longer exists. But ATC, it was small. We were just figuring it out. It was a kind of off-loop theater, so the audience was maybe curious about newer work and okay to see things that were unfinished or challenging. It was 2011. The questions of like the content of the play, the violence in the play, the politics in the play, to have a central character who was a Pakistani American man was, I think, something that we were not used to seeing on our mainstream stages yet. Written by a Pakistani American playwright who had not written other plays before. It was a very exciting moment, which is very different than doing the play in 2015 at the Mark Taper Forum after it's already won the Pulitzer Prize, been on Broadway, been nominated for a Tony, right? So that's a very different type of audience. And also our world was really different, and how we were engaging with the world was really different. And some of the, there's a line in there, about where the African-American female lawyer makes a kind of remark that feels sort of conservative, and when she would do it in a sort of pre-Ben Carson land, people gasped. And then by the time we got to 2015, people would laugh at that line. And just there were a lot of things that really sort of changed. But for me as an artist, my work would change based on the feedback we got in different cities, based on how I continue to evolve as an artist. And in particular with Disgraced, the thing that I learned about it was there's a scene of tremendous violence in the play that both myself and the actors and the playwright continue to wrestle with on our journey. How violent is it? How long should it go on? What story is it telling? And it took us a long time, and in particular me, to get to the bravery to put something really ugly and terrifying on the stage, because that's the question the play is asking. And there's a contract we make with the audience where we know it's not real, and so that it could go there and be that tragic and be that violent. And it took me honestly until the 7th production in Los Angeles to say redemption and forgiveness happen after the play's over, when the lights go out. The characters don't get that. They are still left in a place of unresolve, and that's where the play is going to work the best. And it took me a long time, both personally and to understand sort of how that play plays, to really figure that out. And similarly, actually not similarly, with the niceties, one of the things that I figured out was very technical, was like trusting that 2 people could be on stage, 2 women could be on stage in a room, without the scenes changing for, 2 hours, and that they didn't need a ton of blocking. I realized, like, as that play went on, I kept taking away more and more movement from that play and really trusting the text and letting the arguments live. I think also in that case, Eleanor Burgess, the playwright of that play, she and I really were able to figure out like the math of it, of like where each character made a point and how to keep the argument really even, and also to figure out where the humor comes in. So those are the journeys of those plays. So people have asked a lot about being a female director, or a female identifying director, or identifying as a female director has been a huge turning point in my career. So when I was coming up in my 20s, the directors in front of me were predominantly male. The directors were female. I felt like I didn't have access to, because they'd worked so hard to like shove open the door for themselves, that they just didn't have the energy to hold that door open for the people behind them necessarily, or I felt like I didn't have access. And so a lot of my mentors and people who I was modeling behavior for, and people I was around, were men. Artistic directors were men, my designers were men, except my costume designers usually. And I kind of attempted to model that behavior. Like, what does it mean to be a female leader? And I found I was like standing with a wider stance and wearing my Converse and my baseball hat and learning to like drink whiskey and having to be the boss and know everything, which was behavior that I thought meant being a female leader. And I realized that did not sit right on me, and that like I'm much more comfortable on the floor, and there's a softness and an energy that I want to bring. And then I realized, like, I want to wear lipstick and I want to wear a dress, and if that like sexuality makes somebody uncomfortable, that's their problem and not mine. And that was sort of a turning point where I got to sort of come into my own, and suddenly my work got better. I think a lot of that also coincided with around the time that I had children. And that there was a kind of a softening of my exterior, or whatever mask I was attempting to wear, that I thought was like the mask of being a leader, as opposed to understanding what it really means to be one. And there's another turning point in that journey where I was directing a play called Rapture, Blister, Burn by Gina Gianfrido at the Goodman. And the Goodman had this like amazing event called Women on Fire, where all these like incredible women, women in business came together. It was like the CEO of Walgreens, and like, chief of surgery at a hospital, and like a head curator museum, and there were all these amazing Chicago women that were gathered together. And I was to speak to them about the process of the play. And so I prepared all my notes and all my history about a very feminist play, and talking about the history of feminism. And I go to this event, and there's like this cocktail hour first, and I'm going around from table to table and introducing myself, and all these women are so inspiring and incredible, and I just want to like hear their stories, and to find out that, of course, that they're also like moms and sisters and wives, and have all these like complicated, rich lives. And I was just like, I'm in this room full of these amazing role models. And I realized that I, up until that point, had not identified or called myself a female director, and that being called a female director was something that made me angry. Like, why do you have to identify me as female? Like, the only time we like put male before something is like male stripper or male nurse or male, flight attendant. Like, why are we gendering this field? And I realized at that moment that being a female director was something I was incredibly proud of. And so I kind of got up to my little podium and ripped up my notes, and I wanted to talk about what it meant to sort of own your femaleness, and that it wasn't a monolithic thing, and looking out at this room full of women could mean and be and look like many different things. And I think that was another huge turning point for me in my career. And then another like dot on that timeline was the opportunity to direct Disgraced, which I've already talked about a little bit. And when I went to direct it at American Theater Company, ATC in Chicago, there was a New York producer that was enhancing the production and attached. And they had said to me at that time, like, just so you know, we're planning on moving the show to New York, and just so you know, you're probably not going to move with it. And I thought, I love this play so much, there is no way I'm going to let anybody else direct this play. And I told them that, and they were like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, you know, as it turned out, like I didn't make my agent like beg for right of first refusal or do anything like that. In fact, interestingly enough, at the Niceties, when I directed the first production, I also was not attached to that play in any way. But I knew that what tethered me to that play, the question at the center of that play, was something that I kind of knew I was going to be the person that had to tell this story until that question had been wrestled with. Not to say that someone else couldn't have done it well too, but that there was something in it that just felt right. And so, you know, I stuck with that play. We then had the amazing opportunity to do 2 workshops of it and do it at LCT3 at Lincoln Center in the gorgeous Clairtau Theater. And we did that beautiful production, which then extended. And then, you know, it took over a year to find a Broadway theater, but we all sort of like stuck with it. And then I got the opportunity to make that play on Broadway and to move it from Clairtau Theater, I think it's 110 seats, to then the Lyceum, which I believe is like around 900 seats, and what to challenge the notion of scale and how does intimacy and delicacy of those arguments and the love that's in that play, how does that come through, you know, and then to be able to move the play to different markets, to return home to, you know, Chicago with that play at the Goodman Theater, to then bring it to Berkeley Rep and Seattle Rep and the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles. So those were turning points in my career. But, you know, when people ask me, like, was it always your dream to direct a Broadway play? And I'm like, that's a kind of a dumb dream. I mean, what, like less than 5% of people who direct plays probably get to do that. No, my dream was to like work at the Goodman, a theater where I had coming up in the Chicago theater had always been this pillar of artistic identity, you know, and now I'm a member of the artistic collective there after 24 years of admiration. And so I guess the piece of advice in there too, right, is about building relationships and not having those expectations that those things happen immediately, and that how do you move from audience member to more engaged? How are we engaging with a community and the stories we tell, and all the different ways you can be part of a community. And with that, I hope everybody is safe and sheltering in place and finding curiosity in every moment of their lives right now. I think that's what we can do, right, is keep asking questions. Ask them of each other, ask them of ourselves, but try something new. And I challenge myself every day to put on pants that zip. We can't only be in our soft clothes all the time, friends. Go to work. Much love to everybody, and I hope this was enjoyable. It was a fun little rabbit hole experiment.